You know, we touched on it before, and you guys are both great writers. I love your writing, and maybe you could just talk about how that's had an impact on your career. I know, obviously, on your projects, it's as much your writing as it is your playing, but maybe just talk about how you approach being a composer.
Yeah, well, I write at the piano. I generally, I mean, there's maybe a couple of tunes that maybe some ideas came about on the trombone, but in general, I write at the piano and I sit down and I sometimes maybe I'll have a motif or an idea that I'm starting from that I try to sit down and see if I can work something out and see if it goes somewhere, and that's kind of how most of the pieces I've written start. I think talking about like if I go with my compositions on my 3 different records, the first one is definitely more, they're kind of tunes, it's kind of like, okay, we play the tune, play the head, then we take solos, and then we play the head out again. And then my second record has a couple tunes like that, but then there's also more pieces that are kind of different sections to them. And I think part of that is definitely from like the influence from playing with Maria. I think her music's like that. Also, when I was at Juilliard, I studied with one of the classical composition teachers, a guy named Kendall Briggs, and I would bring jazz pieces I was working on to him, and it was really cool to get a classical composer's perspective on what you're writing, because at that time then I was starting to write things maybe in 2 or 3 movements and different things, and one thing that he said to me a lot that always kind of sticks in my head when I'm writing, he goes, I already heard this, And if you play a vamp, let's say if you play a vamp to him without a solo and you repeat the vamp, he's like, why? I'm bored. I already heard this, So that has definitely been an influence on my writing, and like my latest record has a lot more of that. I mean, like multiple movements, 2 or 3 movements and pieces, and trying to take a motif and then bring it back later on another movement or something like that. In terms of having an effect on career-wise, I'd say, basically, the biggest effects I have. Sometimes I get contact people who want to play my music. Or being able to, I think it's one thing to go out and to be able to play, perform jazz standards or stuff like, or traditional jazz repertoire, but it's also a really great feeling to have the chance to go play your music and present. It's one thing to present your playing in somebody else's composition, but you go out and present your music, and it's kind of, I think, even presenting a even more personal side of yourself in front of an audience. And I would say that's the biggest impact it's had career-wise. And I think, for me, I guess, ultimate dream is actually to be able to do that more, as much as possible, Because for me, that's a really, really unique feeling when you get to play your music with musicians that you want to play with, and they like playing it, and you don't feel like you're working anymore. I think that's the biggest effect it's had career-wise. Yeah.
Cool, very cool.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think composing, historically, has always been an important part of being a jazz musician, first and foremost, because as for me personally, and I think it's sort of a standardized sentiment, the best improvisations sound composed. They have the same logic, they have the same structure and development, and the same shape and drama. And Louis Armstrong was a great composer, so going all the way back. And so to me, it's the same mindset. To me, when you're improvising, I'm trying to compose, but you're obviously doing it in a very spontaneous way. And when I'm composing, I try, although it's a very difficult thing to do, to get into that improvising head, that head where you're not being overly critical, you're not overthinking things, you're just letting it flow. So with that all being said, I also compose at the piano, and I think most great composers do, not just in jazz, but in all styles of music, for obvious reasons. It's just such a logical and well laid out tool to deal with harmony and melody. So I think the better the piano player you are, the better your compositions are going to be. And I think that's one of the problems is we all have limitations on the instrument. Now, Marshall and I we studied classical piano at some point.
You study more than me, man. Yeah. My technique's a little bit.
But still, you play more piano than most. My mom's a piano teacher. I worked professionally at a church on the piano for 8 years. But I think still, I still find it to be limiting at times. So the better pianist you are, the better your compositions are going to sound. And it doesn't just have to do with technique and how fast you can play. It has to do with with kind of the breadth of knowledge in terms of harmony, functional harmony like counterpoint, but also just different sounds and different colors. And so for me, it's two things. It's like developing that internally in terms of listening to lots of different music and building that language base, and then being able to realize it on the piano. So, I mean, for me, aside from Manny Alban, Michael Benny, and David Berger, who are all amazing composers, and mainly very much jazz-centric composers and arrangers, for me, my other huge influence is Duke Ellington, and I've been fortunate enough to be the editor of Jazz at Lincoln Center's essentially Ellington transcriptions for 8 years now. So David Berger does all the heavy lifting, which I don't know how he does it. I mean, you know, every single note, every single drum cymbal hit, he's transcribing. It's really incredible.
Yeah.
But then he sends them to me, and I edit them, and I look for mistakes that were overlooked or things that he just didn't have time to deal with. And in that process, man, I mean, I've just learned so much about writing, not just jazz composition, but just writing in general, and orchestration, and how to develop melodies, how to structure arrangements, and I mean, we just did another batch, and it's like there's always a couple of moments where it's like, wow, I've never ever heard that before. Mm-hmm. You know, this was written in like '42. Never heard that before ever.
Amazing.
It's just so much of the more there than people realize.
Yeah.
You know.
That's very cool. I'd just like to take a quick second and mention both of your, we've talked a lot about it, but just for our viewers, these two latest CDs are really amazing. I would encourage you to pick them up on iTunes or at their websites, marshalljokes.com, ryankeberle.com. But Sound Stories is your latest CD. Fantastic. I listened to both of them this week just to kind of get in the right headspace.
Burning.
And Music is Emotion with this Catharsis ensemble, which is unbelievable with Mike Rodriguez, and it's great stuff. So check out those two CDs. They're really worth their weight in gold. And I'm going to be listening to them a lot going forward. So great stuff. Let's talk a little bit about our lives as musicians, as freelance people. I think we're all in the same boat. Sometimes we have those weeks where like it's just everything's clicking. You go from gig to gig, you're making tons of dough, you're feeling great, and then the next week I'm calling myself to make sure my phone still works. It's like it's unbelievable how it can go from one thing to another. That said, you guys both right now have steady, nice steady jobs that can kind of work as a financial and probably musical anchor. Yeah. Marshall, of course, with the WDR big band in Cologne, Germany. And Ryan here at Hunter College running the jazz program, which I understand you're getting an award tonight, which is a very, very cool thing for your great work and your recordings and so forth. But maybe you could just talk about how you approach that and how that maybe helps you. There's obvious reasons why it helps, but how you look at it in terms of dealing with the freelance stuff that you do on the outside of your steady gig.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, and I just realized this recently. Frank Kimbrough, great pianist in Maria's band and educator at Juilliard now, he recommends a book to all of his students in his business and music class called Steal Like an Artist. Highly recommended. Just a little paperback, easy read, like lots of pictures. And it's just like more like a little coffee table book. Mm-hmm. But really interesting book. Basically how to, in today's world, how to make it as a creative artist and doing things that don't inherently bring you money with success. Or the other way around, with success doesn't necessarily bring you money. My wife actually is the one who picked it up, and one of the things that stuck with me that I realize I've always done, unbeknownst to me, is having a way to pay your bills that still provides you the time to do your craft. Because I mean, if you want to live in New York, you've got some serious bills to pay, and nowadays it's harder than ever to do that just playing your instrument, or even if it's functioning in music at all, it's difficult. So finding a way to pay your bills, but that allows you the time and the energy so that you're not exhausted at the end of the day or when you're not working to still create. I think that's a really, really important balance to find, and you got to find that sort of money producing step. You got to address that first, because if you don't address that, 6 months go by and you're out of money. And you're going back home. Right. Heading back to mom and dad's house. So I think that's really important. So for me, when I first moved to town, I got a job at a church playing piano and singing, like leading the music at this old Catholic church where like no one went. The only service had any people at all was a Spanish service. So I picked up a little Spanish although you wouldn't know it. And you know, learned a bunch of Spanish hymns, and it was a great lesson, and it was, you know, terrible money, but it paid the bills, you know. And,
yeah.
And then that led to a youth jazz orchestra gig that I used to do, New York Youth Symphony's Jazz Orchestra, and then that led to this job, and then of course you pick up other things on the way. I mean, the longer you're in town, and if you're functioning at a high level, you'll pick up things that are more directly related to what you want to do as a trombonist or as an instrumentalist, like subbing on Broadway and playing with Maria and other things that do pay some money.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, those opportunities are few and far between, and there's a lot of amazing musicians vying for those jobs. So I think it's really wise to have a backup plan. And it's not really like, you know, you could think of it as a day gig, but it's really just a way to supplement your craft nowadays, you know. So
Great way to look at it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I first moved to New York, one thing I started doing, and Conrad Herwick had told me, oh, you know, I used to play a lot of salsa gigs, and he still plays with Eddie Palmieri, you know. But I wanted to learn more about that music and get involved with that, because the trombone is very prominent in the music. So I went to I went to a place called Boys Harbor, which is it's like a conservatory for younger students in Spanish Harlem. And they have a big band on Monday nights, a Latin big band that plays, they have all the books of like Tito Puente, Machito, and Tito Rodriguez. And they go and they just rehearse 2 hours every Monday night. And then also a lot of different Latin bands rehearse there. So I went one night, and then one of the singers says, hey man, give me your number. And I have a rehearsal tomorrow, can you make it? I said, yeah, and, you know, and so all of a sudden, next thing I knew, I was playing 5 nights a week of salsa, you know, and I loved it. You know,
Yeah,
it's been a huge influence on my playing, but kind of similar to what Ryan was saying relative to his church gig, is like that kind of led, most of the things I do now, including my current job at WDR, I could kind of actually really trace back somehow to the Latin community in New York gigs, you know, and eventually maybe I met somebody who was more from a jazz thing. Oh, hey man, can you do this big band thing? And then guys hear you. But anyway, my current gig though, my job, what do we call it?
yeah, right.
Occupation? No, my like steady job right now. Yeah, I play with the WDR big band, and I've been there about 3.5 years. And the way that came about is that I got an email, I think John Fedshock forwarded me an email that he had gotten from the bass player in the band, a guy named John Goldsby, and he said, John said, hey, maybe this is something that might interest you. And I knew of those bands. I knew of the WDR particularly from a record called East Coast Blowout that Jim McNeely wrote for them with John Schofield and Mark Johnson and Adam Nussbaum. My brother had it when we were younger, and then I had a copy as well. And it's a great record. So I knew of the band of that and of the radio bands in Germany. And so I thought, oh well, at least, you know, send an application and show some interest. And then what happens, the way we hire people, the way I was hired, and that we hire people when we look for somebody to fill a chair, is that it's a pretty cool process. It's different from a symphony orchestra in that, you know, basically people can submit an application, and then the band says, okay, yeah, we want to check this guy out, and so they hire you to come. I was hired to come play the first production. I went in November 2009. I got to go play a 2-week production with the band, 2 concerts in the Philharmonic, and that was with Patty Austin, arranged by Michael Abeni. And then they had me back maybe 10 months later, you know, to do another thing with Mike Stern and Dave Weckl and Tom Kennedy. And anyway, so and then later on they offered me the position, and I was wanted to live in Europe. It's a great band, and so I took it. But and so that that basically managed though to keep on playing a lot of the small group gigs I do. You know, an example like this week I'm here in New York. We're off there, and I'm playing with Ryan and I are both playing this week with the Gil Evans project. And you know, last weekend I was playing in Naples, Italy, with a harpist I played with named Edmar Castaneda, and we were off WDR, so it worked perfectly. You know, other times, you know, they've actually been really good there about letting me sub out and do my other things. But so it's been really great from that perspective. On the other hand, though, I mean, it's still, you know, it's still, like I was saying earlier, really my dream though eventually is to play more and more of your own music and be playing as much of that as possible. Well, I mean, it's also great. You still learn from being around those other things, but so yeah. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense right now.
Yeah, total sense, yeah. And it's great. Obviously, a gig like that is great because you're playing so much of the time. It feeds right into what your craft is. So it's kind of...
It's a very different kind of playing, though, because basically, you know, this past week we were playing with John Clayton and Gerald Clayton. His son is a great jazz pianist. And John Clayton is a great bassist and band leader. And so he did the arrangements, some of his son's compositions or his son's arrangements that were then arranged for big band, orchestrated for big band by John. But it's interesting, you know, because very different here in New York, you know, if we had a gig, you know, like we're doing this thing this week, you know, so each night we're playing different music and we rehearse for each night maybe 3 hours, you know.
Yeah.
And in this case, this past week at WDR, we rehearse/recorded. We work in a recording studio Monday through Friday. And then we had the week, Saturday and Sunday off. I went to play in Naples, Italy. And then we did a run-through of the music on Monday, also recording. And then we had a concert on Tuesday night. And it's just one concert, you know. And it's a dream situation for music because in New York, it's very interesting. But it's very different because coming from this environment, I think maybe I'm a little high-strung, you know, being in New York for 12 years. And
can't understand why that would be the case.
Yeah. And you know, it's a very different system, you know. But you know, and also you're sitting every day. You know, we don't record every single day, but you know, generally a few days a week with a microphone in front of you, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, and you know, the red light that goes on, and they say, okay, you know, here we go. And I love recording, so it's kind of cool to get to record almost every day.
Totally.
You guys are both young. You have, you know, like we've talked about, you have achieved so much in your career already. If you were to look forward to the next 5, 10, 20 years, what are some of the goals that you guys have musically that you're looking towards?
Much like Marshall, I'd love to be playing my own music in a small group setting with my band, Catharsis. I feel like I finally, I've always been a firm believer in like working bands and the kind of magic and chemistry that comes from that. So I've finally sort of found that it's not easy to do, you know, even with as many great players in New York, finding the right personnel and the right, really the bigger thing is the right concept musically from a compositional perspective. So I feel like I finally have something that I really enjoy writing for and working with. And so yeah, I mean, I hope even within the next year, I really hope to be touring with that band on a semi-regular basis. So we've got our first tour. For me, it's the first tour ever as a band leader down to the DC area in August.
Nice.
Playing down there. So I just hope to do more of that. And you know, oftentimes that means working with universities, since there's a budget typically at universities to help fund tours of that nature.
Very cool.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I've said it maybe 3 times, but playing my own stuff more is definitely a goal for me. I'd like to, you know, I work on a lot of classical stuff, and one project I'd like to do is actually I want to write a bunch of music for solo trombone and piano and actually record it.
Cool.
And kind of be not necessarily. Sometimes I feel in the classical trombone community is such a kind of attitude like this is the way you play this stuff, you know, and so. And I kind of want to write something that maybe kind of takes a little bit from my jazz influences, also harmonically speaking in terms of the piano parts, but also playing-wise, though, and articulation-wise and stuff, and apply that, you know. You know, sometimes I'll practice like the Rochu etudes with doodle tongue and stuff just to try to get it really smooth, you know. But and I remember when I was in high school, at Interlock, and on the jury, I had this one I played really fast, and they said, "What kind of articulation are you using?" And you know, then I said, "Oh, it's the doodle tongue." Like, "Oh no, that's cool." It sounded really smooth, but since it's you know, so,
Sounds good, but we can't have the word doodle used.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
So, but actually, I mean, I'd like to do that, and another thing actually that I really enjoy that I don't get to do too much of is I really enjoy teaching, and going forwards, I'd actually like to do more of it, have the chance to teach more, maybe on a more regular basis. Now I find most of the time I get to teach, I'm maybe invited to a school for a couple of days, and it's kind of come in, do a master class, and get out. You know? But I think, you know, what I found is that, you know, for instance, Ryan and I both had the chance to teach at the Brubeck Institute in California, which is kind of it's in their summer jazz colony, which is a very small program, maybe 20 or 24 students, and it's all kind of the top kids in the country. And if they get in, and being around people like that, kids like that is so inspiring, and getting to share with them. But then they tell you something, you're like, oh, what's that? You know, show me, like, what did you just play? And, And I would really like to have the chance to do more of that, because I really enjoy it.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, I'm quite confident you guys will both be achieving all of your goals as you have up to this point. As we close out today, you know, the music business, I've certainly seen it over my 30-year career. It's changed dramatically in especially the last 10 years, but certainly even in the last 15 to 20 years. And you guys have managed to continue to forge, you know, great careers. And I use you both as examples when I go out and do master classes that it's not impossible. It's very possible. But this is the level here. We're talking about Marshall Gilkes and Ryan Keberle. You better be ready to go if you're coming here. If you had a piece of advice that you'd offer for younger players, obviously your talent is without question, but other things factor in: intellect, likability, professionalism, all those things. If you could just give you a quick, here's what I would suggest to a talented player out there who's thinking about going into music, what would that advice be?
Stop. No, don't do it. No. Well, actually, I do find sometimes these days, I think sometimes people are actually so worried. Even in school, sometimes I see like teachers talking more about business than actually the practicing part, you know. And I don't know, I think I always felt like, you know, sometimes I get frustrated, or, you know, one can get frustrated and you see, oh, how does that guy get to do all that stuff? And how's he, you know. But I kind of have at least my own, I don't know if I have a philosophy, but it sounds sophisticated.
Yeah,
so I'll say my philosophy is that I kind of feel like if you keep on working hard at what you do, then eventually things are going to come your way. You know, I feel like, you know, it has to eventually work out. Somebody has to, if you're working hard, and you know, somebody has to take notice. And another part of that, though, is I felt really lucky. You know, I think a really important thing is not to turn your nose up to things, you know, opportunities, you know. You never know where it's going to take you. You know, I mean, playing in Latin music and salsa music, I mean, it was a huge influence on my music, on my writing and my playing, rhythmic concept, and I mean, stuff I love. Actually, I really miss doing that, having the opportunity to play those gigs and stuff. And my point being is, I think, you know, I still have that attitude. You know, maybe sometimes too much. Somebody say, "Hey, can you do this?" Yes. Yeah. Wait, what is it? And oh, wait a second. You know, but I you know, especially at a young age, my thing was just like yes.
Definitely.
Yes. You know,
never say no. If you say no, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bad sign.
Even the great Will Lee, who's, you know, been the greatest bass player, one of them in history. You know, and he's working every night. He's doing Letterman, but his philosophy is, "I didn't come to New York to say no."
Yeah,
and that's what he says. And it's
if
exactly Will Lee has that attitude, then I think you're absolutely right.
I mean, granted, there are some exceptions,
yeah, of course.
but in general, especially when you're young, you know, yes, and you know, you either, you know, I mean, you learn so much from every musical experience, you know, and whether, you know, I feel like, you know, I love the pressure of like when I was in New York still, like going to play a Broadway show the first time if you're subbing, you know, and because you sit at home with maybe a book and a video of the gig, but you know, but you have to walk in and nail it, you know, and if you don't, you're not going to get called back, you know, and if you don't do it enough times, you're never going to get called for that stuff. But I think all these different opportunities, and I feel like being involved in an opportunity like that, or they all make you a better musician, you know, increase your musicianship. And I think all of that even is relevant to being an improviser, being a jazz player, because you're constantly hearing new melodies, new different ideas, and maybe different rhythmical ideas and stuff, or different feels you're playing with. You know, so
yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, maybe just to like add a few more thoughts to what Marshall already said. I think what you said is exactly true, but it's assuming that the student already knows how to learn and listen and is self-critical. I mean, I find a lot of students kind of think they've got it together, you know, and that's a really bad attitude to have at any age and at any level. I mean, I think the best players, hands down, are always the ones. It's not just a matter about being hard on yourself, but it's a matter of being an eternal student and always looking to find those lessons, because a lot of people don't find those lessons. A lot of people play those same gigs and just leave, and they're, okay, that's it, that's done, let's go to the next gig. But so being open to learning from every experience, being self-critical, constantly trying to figure out what you can do better and how, and spending the time to do that, you know, dedicating the time to do that, having patience, as you said as well. If you just keep sticking with it, if you're doing everything right, it's still not going to happen fast. You know, you got to have patience. And you know, a lot of my friends who are doing what I would like to do, they are doing it now, but they're 45 years old. I'm 32 years old, so it's like thinking, okay, is it going to take me 13 more years to get to where I want to go? And probably will. I mean, you got to have that patience. You know, and then coming back to it, I think before all of that, coming back to the listening part. I mean, what I've learned teaching here at Hunter, because I deal with a lot of non-musicians, is the incredible diversity of listening ability. It's really amazing what we hear and someone else doesn't hear. And that's probably somewhat obvious between musicians and non-musicians, but when I started thinking about it, I started paying more attention to it even amongst musicians. And it's amazing how people hear things differently. Even things that, at least in my perspective, aren't really subjective. I mean, things that to me are very black and white, and I hear it one way and they hear it another, or they don't hear it at all. Mm-hmm. That's the big thing. And so like training your ear to be the most astute and focused, intensely focused, and observant listening device as possible. And I think that's a never-ending thing. I mean, I'm hearing stuff now. I'm hearing just recently, like the last couple of years, I'm hearing so many versions of swing that I never used to hear. Like, you know, I'm starting to finally understand like what, you know, some drummers talk about is, you know, this guy swings that way, that guy swings that way. I mean, I could always maybe feel it. Maybe that's important too, being connected with the feeling. But now I'm starting to actually hear it in a technical and codified way. Like I'm hearing things and knowing what's different because I'm able to hear it at that level. So just developing your ear, and I think that just comes with listening. You know, listening to music, listening to, and in a focused way. Mm-hmm. Like never if you want to develop your ear, you never be listening just casually. You know, and that doesn't mean it's not fun. A lot of people, I say that to people, and they're like, yeah, but I just like to listen for the fun of it. And it's like, yeah, well, you can do both. I mean, to me, it's way more fun to listen now because I'm hearing so much more. I mean, it's fun to listen in a focused way. Yeah. You know, and in a detailed way.
Yeah, that's, well, both fantastic advice. Well, listen, I want to thank both of you. It's been fantastic. I feel like I learned a ton, so I know people tuning in got a ton of, no, it's really great.
Well, let me just say I've learned incredible amounts playing next to you.
Wow, yeah. Thank you, Ryan.
Incredible.
It's very kind of you to say. But these two gentlemen, keep an eye on them. Marshall Gilkes, Ryan Keberle, go to their websites, hear them with their own groups out touring, see them with Maria Schneider's band. They're going to be making a lot of noise for the next several decades. So keep an eye on Marshall and Ryan. We want to thank all of you for watching today, and we will see you next time on Bone2Pick.